have the Mark Rogers TV Big Ten coaches rankings from several months ago. All right. Chris Ash at number 14. I did about 4 hours of research just to get me to that 14th ranking to rank Ash. Okay, number 13, Mike Locksley. Number 12, Tom Allen. Number 11, Lovie Smith. Number 10 is Ryan Day. I would explain that. That doesn't mean I believe he's the 10th best coach in the Big Ten. Anyway, he obviously doesn't have a track record. Number 9, PJ Fleck. 8, Jeff Brom. I've got Kirk Ferentz at 7. James Franklin at 6. Scott Frost at 5. Paul Christ at 4. Mark D'Antonio 3. Jim Harbaugh 2. And Pat Fitzgerald at number 1. That's my list.
Somehow Kirk Ferentz comes home with the trophy every year for Big Ten Coach of the Year.
Yeah, he does do that. And he built his reputation on taking over a bad program from Hayden Fry and elevating it quickly. But since then, it's been a bunch of 8-4s and 7-5s for the last 10 or 12 years. So that was all done aside from an aberration or two where he broke through, like in 2015, they almost won the Big Ten championship game, almost went undefeated into the playoff. But aside from one of those couple outliers, the program's been very like number 35-ish in the country for a long time.
So, but that's why you have to flip he and James. Like, they're right there neck and neck. You got to flip Kurt because he actually will be a giant killer at times, and he'll win a big game every once in a while. And I think that's going to be maybe the difference between the juxtaposition between the two.
I'm not going to comment on Day at 10. That's your cross to bear right there. But I'm going to sit there and say that Tom Allen probably needs to be a little higher. And I would have Jeff Brom, honestly. I know that his body of work is pretty small right now, but I think he was way too low. I don't know who I would move down outside of PJ Fleck. Just not sold on PJ Fleck and his row the boat. And
did you see what he did last November in January? What he did at Western Michigan?
Row the boat.
Yeah, he rode he rode the boat.
His recruiting rankings.
You know, what have you done for me lately? So
what he did for you lately was win a bowl game and beat Wisconsin and beat like 3 really good teams in November.
Wisconsin team. Jack Cohn was probably playing. I don't know. But it
was for Paul Bunyan's axe.
He's got the axe, Kevin.
Paul Chris gave a really rousing press conference before the game because he's so full of energy. But I don't know. I'm a big believer of Tom Allen at Indiana, and I understand that he is playing with a deck that is stacked against him. Indiana is coming around as a little bit of a football state, but it's a basketball state. The little 500 is more important than Indiana football out there in Bloomington right now, to be quite honest. So he's got a lot of things going against him at this point. Is he Terry Hepner yet? No, but he's going to get him there. He's going to get him there, and they're going to be a perennial 6-7 win team here soon.
Minnesota, Indiana, what should the expectations be? I think they're Minnesota maybe a little bit higher, but
is that division though?
Program too that fired Glenn Mason because they felt they could do better and has forever been punished because of it.
There's 6 teams in the West that could win the West. If you put Indiana in the West, they would be one of those teams that could win it. I think. I'm interested. Lovey, I think I would have him lower just because it's such a mess there. But I am interested to see what they look like this year. They've got a good offense that could run the ball well last year. But when you're talking about quarterback or coaches, if we were to draft them, like we'd each go around these squares, you draft first, you draft second. Where is Jeff Brom going? Where is Ryan Day going? I don't think Ryan Day is going to go 10th. And I'm with you. And Jeff Brom might go early. Is Scott Frost the first pick? Where is James Franklin?
I am combining that philosophy right there. Who do I want coaching my team? So if this is circa 2008 and I'm ranking national coaches, Bobby Bowden and Joe Paterno are 2 all-time legends, top 5 coaches, top 10 coaches, but I'm not ranking them that because they had lost their fastball. They weren't that coach anymore. I'd rank them 40th or 50th or whatever. So I take that approach that I don't go with legacy. I go with what would I select right this second? So that's one factor. But I also look at track record, and Ryan Day does not have one. So my thought process there is I'm going to take the guys who have yet to coach, especially at certainly at that school, but especially those guys that have never been head coaches, and I'm going to make them neutral. They're my neutral ranking, and anybody who I believe is underachieved, I'm going to rank below them, and then the people that I think that are performing well in their jobs over them for the time being. I do not think Ryan Day is the 10th best coach in the Big Ten.
Where did you have Pat Fitzgerald?
Number 1. You're perplexed. At Northwestern. What is Northwestern going to be? What is, Kevin? What do you think Northwestern is in the almighty FPI right now? I bet they outperform that thing every year.
Listen, I'm the one.
The same Northwestern that opened the season at 1-3 or something like that. I understand that they ended up going 8-1 in the Big Ten to win the West, but they didn't even look good during their non-conference. I mean, I'm a big Pat Fitzgerald believer. I mean, I'm only playing devil's advocate here on this point. I don't know if I'd have him 1, but I'd have him top 3, maybe.
The Green Bay Packers certainly thought a lot of him.
Well,
Northwestern, if you look at their schedule, they could open 1-5 this year. They're at Stanford. They have a bye week before UNLV. Then it's Michigan State at home. Then it's at Wisconsin, at Nebraska, bye week, Ohio State at home. All of those are winnable, yes, if they play their best. But we know that's not what Northwestern normally does early in the season. So I definitely appreciate what he does, and I think he would be great at Michigan as well and be very good everywhere else. But that schedule this year is very, very tough for them.
And if they're competitive in all those games and they are 1-5, that's not going to affect my analysis.
Right. Yeah.
His ability.
How do you rate that?
Go ahead, Tony.
Because I think close losses are coach's fault a lot of times. And so how do you feel about that? If it's 1-5 and they're losing by an average of 4 points, is that lack of explosive talent? Is that new quarterback? Where does coaching fall in there? Or do you have to see the games?
I've got to see the game. So if Northwestern has a brutal Big Ten Eastern Division stretch, let's say they've got to face 3 of the Giants or at least 2 or 3 out of the 3 games cross division, and they're playing rather well in those games, then I'm going to credit Pat Fitzgerald with the limitations he has at a Northwestern versus obviously the expectations are different at every school. If Pat Fitzgerald became the head coach at Ohio State, he couldn't go 8-5 every year, and I wouldn't have him the number 1 rated coach in the Big Ten.
Well, look at last year, and I don't have the book in front of me, but if I remember their game against Michigan, they were up 14-0, and then they were inside the 10 or something like that, and they couldn't punch it in. And they had to kick a field goal to go up 17-0. And I remember saying to people sitting by me in the press box, I said, "That's not going to be enough to win it." And they gave up the next 21 points. That's a 4-point loss. Undergirds principle right there. That's on coaching. So
when he's coaching top 50 or 55 talent in the country against top 8 or 10 talent in the country, I tend to credit that Pat Fitzgerald's doing a nice job coaching his Northwestern bunch versus that Michigan roster, losing 20-17.
Would he be your number 1 draft pick?
Yeah, he said so, right?
I think he would be.
Really?
Yeah. Frost would be my number 1.
Yeah.
Frost would be my number 1. And I'm not one to go too much on what I saw at UCF. That's kind of an outlier, just based on what I saw in the back half of this last season. I mean, they got off to a horrendous start. Mother Nature didn't do them any favors. They lost their tune-up game before a road game at Colorado, which really kind of set the deck in the wrong direction for them. But what I saw coming on, and I think once he gets the right defensive players in there, I don't know enough about his staff on that side of the ball to start, calling for heads or anything at this point. But I think once they get it there, they're going to be just a pain to deal with.
Well, let's realize that even though Scott Frost will upgrade that roster, that Mike Riley recruited classes in the low 20s. That was not a horrible roster that Scott Frost took over.
No. But he's probably the best possible fit for that program.
Right.
Oh, sure. He is.
Well, he also had classes fall apart. They had that whole Calabrasca movement that,
they had people defect.
That just went to pot, literally, at the end. And because of that, there was a kind of a hole in there. And I don't necessarily think that – I think I think Mike Riley was recruiting for points instead of recruiting for what he needed on that roster. Yeah, it may have been in the low 20s or wherever, but I don't. Rich Rod recruited pretty well too. If you wanted your team to be filled with 5'11", 190 pounders, I mean, he did a great job on that. But that was never going to work in the Big Ten.
Mike Riley also inherited a quarterback in Tommy Armstrong, who was a glorified running back, and he never fit his West Coast offense. So he never was able to kind of turn that around and get the guy in place and be able to get the 1 or 2 seasons he's needed to really institute his system.
That's fair. But, I also talked to some people out of Oregon State as soon as he was hired, and they said that's just not going to work. I mean, he is the nicest guy in the world. Trust me, he is the nicest guy in the world. He works in Corvallis. It's not going to work. It's not going to work elsewhere. And they proved to be right.
We'll finish up with this guy because I think he's had a fascinating tenure, and that's Mark D'Antonio at Michigan State. Now, I could not believe this. So I'm in the midst of taking phone calls and so forth the other night, and I have somebody ripping on Michigan and commenting that they haven't been able to beat lowly Michigan State for the most part. And I went, okay, Texas fan, do you want me to compare what Michigan State has accomplished in the last 10 years versus what Texas has accomplished in the last 10 years? Because your lowly Michigan State has finished in the top 5 a number of times, the top 10 as well, 1 Rose Bowls, Cotton Bowls, 1 Big Ten championships. Yes, what Mark D'Antonio has accomplished at Michigan State, yes, a bit of the luster has been taken off by 3-9, 10-3, 7-6. Not the greatest run the last 3 years, and he's probably hit his ceiling, and it's probably flattened out, and now he's plateaued to where he's going to go 8-4 most of the time. But it's pretty astonishing what he did there at East Lansing.
Yeah, he's like the perfect guy for that place. Like I said, he's a lifer. That 3-9 took everybody by surprise, though, and I think it, Kevin, kind of stems from that recruiting class where they had a really good recruiting class, a lot of high-profile recruits who all flamed out and flamed out in some very negative ways, and it almost felt like they flew too close to the sun and had to come back down to earth and like realize who they are. Like, no, you're just Michigan State. And I think maybe they lost their way where I think there was some concern where it's the whole born on third base thinking, you hit a triple. And I think maybe for some of those young guys, that's how it was. And it wasn't that way for the seniors who had worked so hard and all of the wars in 2013 with Ohio State, 2014 with Ohio State, and even 2012 losing at home to Ohio State, where you're kind of forged by these tough losses and these huge wins, and you begin to appreciate things more. And then you get to that, you make the playoffs, you think you've made it, and then the following year you just get shellacked because you think it's easy, and it's not.
Well, stop me if you've heard this before. He's too loyal to his assistants, and that coming from a Tressel disciple. Okay. But, there's a major announcement that was going to come out of East Lansing. And basically all he did was rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic. He just sat there and he didn't make any staff changes. He just put different hats on everybody and said, all right, there we go. And again, I think that Mark D'Antonio has done a wonderful job. When we think they're going to be down, they generally rise up and overperform a lot of times. Maybe sometimes when we have really high expectations for them, they come in a little bit under. I agree with everything that Tony had to say there too. But I think part of the issue there is things have maybe gotten a little stale with that staff right now. And, I'm not, again, calling for people's jobs or anything like that. But I think coming off, there were definitely some issues when you lose your running back and you just have a bad situation at quarterback in terms of, Brian Lewerke got a bit of the yips and Rocky Lombardi was kind of thrust into an impossible position at that point. And, when you're not able to run the ball and they lost one of their top receivers as well, Felton Davis, I believe, when all of that happens, I mean, you can't necessarily put all of that on the coaching, but I think that they needed to, it's like the manager getting run in a baseball game just to rile up the troops, or the coach getting a couple of tees to fire them up. I don't know. I think that Dino needed to make a couple moves on that staff just to try and shake some things up, because as long as that malaise continues at East Lansing, they're going to be a middling team.
Tony, you mentioned some games being a better indicator of a coach's ability or inability than other games. You know what game comes to mind that I don't think would for most people was that 48-3 shellacking at Ohio Stadium 2 years ago in 2017, a Michigan State team that was really good. They beat Washington State in the Holiday Bowl. They finished 10-3. Not that it for me, that didn't shine a poor light on D'Antonio. That showed a light of, this is really Ohio State at its best, and this is Michigan State, maybe not even at the worst, but this is the talent disparity. But he just couldn't do anything about it that particular day. But this is basically what he's doing with Michigan State, is building a 10-3 team that if they don't come and they don't have the technique and the fundamentals down and don't play their near A game that particular day, this is what can happen. This is the mediocre, decent team that he has, and he pieces it together most of the season. But if he doesn't have it just right on that day, this is what can happen against one of the top 3 to 5 teams in the country.
Well, and I did my Big Ten East defensive line rankings, and I put Michigan State number 1, not because they have the most talent, but because they are the best unit, and they're all back from last year, and they allowed like 77 yards rushing per game. There's going to be like 2 guys on that line that you take over some people from Ohio State or some people from Penn State, and then nobody else. But together, you can't argue with what they've done. But you get back to that 48-3 last year. That was the week after the Purdue, the Iowa debacle in 2017.
Yep.
So that was an example of Urban Meyer getting his troops ramped up, and we've seen that before. We saw that after the 2015 Michigan State game, where they went to Michigan and destroyed the Wolverines, I think 42-13. So that's another example of why Urban Meyer was way up here and everybody else is, considerably lower.
I've always said it would be fascinating. Let's say we prime Urban Meyer out of retirement, he and Nick Saban being the gold standard. And I know as soon as I make that comment, I got a bunch of SEC folks that jump on me and say, you can't compare the two. Well, you can, because national championships in college football are not objective, and the process to deliver the teams to those places to be able to win those aren't objective. So I can certainly match up those 2 coaching careers. Anyway, that it would be fascinating to take a Nick Saban or an Urban Meyer, let's say at the conclusion of the previous season, and say, we're sending you out to Lawrence, Kansas, and you're going to coach Kansas this year. And Saban, we're going to send you out to Corvallis, and you got to coach Oregon. It would just be, I would be fascinated to see how much those teams would improve with the same roster.
And that's kind of what, Mark has done with Michigan State. And like you mentioned, Mark, he has taken what he's got and what he can get, whatever's left-ish, and consistently makes them a team on the schedule that you at least have to respect, right? And to Kevin's point about, they might have taken a 48-3 shellacking, but you don't know which Michigan State is going to show up that day. Are they going to be the giant killer Michigan State? Are they going to get shellacked Michigan State? So regardless of what you may think about, how stale it is, and I agree, and how he may be still kind of in an antiquated system for college football, he at least has the respect level on that roster and on the team consistently, where you have to pay attention. You've got to at least put them in a different color highlighter.
And to your point, Claire, it's pretty damn good when for 7 years against Urban Meyer, you basically show up as the giant killer or close to the giant killer every time, except for the one time your team just wasn't on its game and ran into the one coming off the Iowa loss against Ohio State. Because other than that, even in 2016 against the playoff Ohio State team, the 3-9 team came within a 2-point conversion to pull off the upset, 17-16. So.
Right. Only 2 coaches had 2 wins against Urban Meyer during his tenure at Ohio State, and that was Dabo Swinney and that was Mark D'Antonio.